The sky was syrupy blue when Naomi and her son Milo pulled into the gravel driveway of the Weatherstone estate. The house stood tall and too proud, a sprawling brick colonial with white shutters and a wraparound porch decked out in patriotic bunting and wind chimes. It looked like the kind of place meant for magazine covers, not for people like her and her quiet, quirky son. She parked behind a line of dusty SUVs and family minivans, heart already tight in her chest. Milo unbuckled his seatbelt and hugged his sketchpad to his chest, eyes wide with cautious wonder. He was 10 years old, a wiry boy with knobby elbows and a mind like a kaleidoscope, always drawing, always imagining. He didn't notice the glances, the smirks, the whispered comments. Naomi noticed them all. This was the 4th year they'd attended the extended Monroe family's annual summer heritage gathering, though it felt less like heritage and more like high school drama in adult form. The event was always hosted by Aunt Ramona, a woman who styled herself as the family matriarch despite her divisive tendencies and dramatic flair. Naomi had almost declined this year, tired of the tight smiles and side comments about being a single mom, about Milo being sensitive or artsy. But Milo wanted to go. He didn't remember the snide remarks, just the things that stuck: the horses in the field, the watermelon eating contest, and the summer Uncle Blake taught him to whistle. So she said yes. For him. As they walked up the porch steps, Ramona met them with her usual overperfumed hug and a shrill well, the free spirits have arrived. Naomi smiled through her teeth. Milo just nodded politely, clutching his sketchpad like a shield. Inside, the house buzzed with chaotic energy. Kids ran through hallways, adults balanced paper plates loaded with ribs and potato salad, and country music blared from invisible speakers embedded in the ceiling. Naomi found a corner on the deck, away from the crowd, while Milo crouched near the steps, sketching the fountain in the garden with determined focus. Time passed in a swirl of forced conversations and polite dismissals. Naomi drifted through interactions, nodding when necessary, smiling when expected. Her sister Camilla asked if she was still doing that freelance design thing, and her cousin Leon joked that Milo would grow out of his weird little drawing phase. She said nothing. She always said nothing. It was easier. But something gnawed at her now. Milo was getting older. He was starting to notice the odd silences, the quick glances, the way the kids subtly excluded him from their games. He'd asked on the drive if he'd get a gift bag this year like the others. Naomi had said, of course, though her stomach had twisted at the lie. Because she knew Ramona. Knew what these gift bags were really about. It had started 3 years ago, Ramona's brilliant idea to hand out summer surprise packs to the kids, a mix of water balloons, cheap toys, candy, and customized t-shirts with each child's name on it. On the surface, it was sweet. In reality, it was a ranking system, thinly veiled. The louder the cheers when a name was called, the more favor that child had earned. Milo's name had never been called first. Or second. Or sometimes at all. Still, Naomi stayed. For the food. For the pictures. For the illusion. That afternoon, when Ramona clapped her hands and shouted, "Okay, little sunbeams, time for your summer packs," the children flocked to the center of the backyard like moths to a sparkler. A long table stood beneath the pergola, bright gift bags neatly arranged in a perfect row. Naomi watched from her chair, every muscle tense. Milo stood at the edge of the group, sketchpad still in hand, trying to smile. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the Monroe estate, but in that moment, every eye was fixed on the man standing in the doorway. Jackson Monroe wasn't the kind of man people ignored, not even a family as performative and judgmental as theirs. He had been a myth for over a decade, a ghost name whispered in disapproval and family feuds. Naomi's father. The man who walked away. And now, he was here. His boots hit the deck with slow, deliberate steps as he crossed the porch, each stride landing like a gavel. Naomi watched as Ramona's confident smirk wilted. The cousins shifted uncomfortably. Even the kids stopped fidgeting. Jackson had that kind of gravity, he didn't need to yell. He simply was, and that was enough to unsettle everyone. He walked straight to Milo, crouched beside him, and gently took the dog collar from his small hands. He didn't say a word right away. Just turned it over in his calloused palms, reading the tag, "Property of Maddie." His jaw tightened. Naomi stood frozen, hand hovering protectively near her son's shoulder, torn between gratitude and decades of unresolved feelings. Jackson looked up at her. His eyes were older, maybe softer than she remembered, but no less fierce. Then he turned to the crowd. Which one of you gave this to my grandson? His voice was low, measured, but each syllable landed with weight. Silence. Ramona finally found her voice, though it trembled slightly. Now, Jackson, let's not be dramatic. It was just a harmless joke. Kids being kids. Maddie thought it would be funny. Jackson didn't even blink. A child doesn't think up something like this on her own. Someone taught her cruelty and called it humor. No one moved. He stood, still holding the collar, and turned toward Ramona. You gave this to a 10-year-old boy who's done nothing but show up and be kind. You embarrassed him in front of everyone. You made him the punchline of your little game. Ramona crossed her arms, trying to regain control. Don't come into my home after a decade and tell me how to run my family. You gave up that right a long time ago. I gave up nothing, Jackson replied. I left a place that had stopped being a home a long time before I walked out. But make no mistake, I came here today because Naomi asked. I came because I thought maybe, just maybe, things had changed. I see now they haven't. Milo stood quietly between them, clutching his sketch pad to his chest again. Naomi reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. Jackson turned back to his grandson, and from the satchel slung over his shoulder, he pulled a small wooden box. He opened it and handed it to Milo. Inside was a leather-bound sketchbook with Milo's name engraved on the cover, along with a complete set of artist tools, charcoal pencils, erasers, blending sticks, and a sharpener nestled in a velvet case. These are for you, Jackson said. Not to impress anyone. Not to earn their approval. Just to create. Because you see the world differently, and that's something they'll never understand if they're too busy laughing at what they fear. Milo's eyes widened as he ran his fingers over the cover, the texture of the leather smooth and rich beneath his fingertips. He didn't say anything, but Naomi saw the shift in his shoulders, the way they straightened slightly, the way he stood a little taller. Ramona scoffed. Really? You show up after all this time and act like the hero? Is that it? Naomi had heard enough. She stepped forward. Her voice was calm but firm, layered with a strength that had long been dormant. No. He's not here to be the hero. He's here because I asked. Because I've spent too many years pretending this kind of thing was okay. Laughing it off. Letting you humiliate us for the sake of keeping the peace. Ramona rolled her eyes. Oh, don't be so sensitive. No, Naomi said, sharper now. You don't get to dismiss us with that word anymore. Sensitive is what you call people when you don't want to take responsibility for being cruel. The air tightened. People looked around, avoiding eye contact. A few cousins mumbled something about not wanting drama. Others quietly backed away, pretending to tend to the buffet or herd their children elsewhere. Naomi stepped beside Milo. You think you can hand my son a dog collar and make a joke of him? Not anymore. We're done playing your games. She picked up the collar from the table and placed it next to a platter of ribs, as if to say, this is what your laughter tastes like. We're leaving, she said simply. Ramona opened her mouth, but Naomi held up a hand. Don't. No fake apology. No just a joke line. Just. Don't. Jackson nodded once, stepped in beside them. I parked out front, he said quietly. They walked across the lawn, the gravel crunching beneath their feet like applause for a show that was finally over. Milo walked between them, still quiet, still holding the sketchbook like it was made of glass and stars. He didn't look back. But Naomi did. Ramona was still standing on the deck, arms folded, alone. The others had moved on, conversation returning in nervous murmurs. But Naomi didn't feel small this time. She didn't feel out of place. She felt like she was exactly where she needed to be, beside her son, walking away from people who mistook cruelty for tradition. Halfway to the driveway, Milo tugged gently on her hand. Are we really leaving? He asked, his voice small but steady. Yes, baby, Naomi said. We're really leaving. And for the first time, she meant it. They reached the truck, an old F-150 with paint faded by sun and time. Naomi helped Milo into the passenger side while Jackson climbed in behind the wheel. The engine rumbled to life, and with it, a new sense of something Naomi hadn't felt in years. Freedom. As the truck pulled away from the Monroe estate, the house receded in the rearview mirror, shrinking into a memory. Naomi glanced at her son. Milo had flipped open the sketchbook and was already drawing. He didn't ask what had happened or why. He didn't need to. The story was already unfolding beneath his pencil. The soft hum of the truck's engine filled the space between Naomi, Jackson, and Milo as they drove away from the Monroe estate. No one spoke. Not because there was nothing to say, but because silence, for once, didn't feel like avoidance. It felt like release. Naomi leaned her head against the passenger window, watching the trees blur into streaks of green and gold. Beside her, Milo was curled up with his new sketchbook on his lap, already lost in the swirl of pencil lines. His little fingers moved with purpose, shading, outlining, pressing. He hadn't said a word since they left, but his silence wasn't the tight, uncertain quiet from earlier. It was full of focus, intention, ownership. She turned her head slightly to glance at her father, hands steady on the wheel, eyes locked on the road. Jackson hadn't said much since his dramatic entrance at the reunion, but Naomi could still feel the weight of what had passed between them, years of distance, of unspoken questions, of silence that had once felt like betrayal. He broke that silence with a low, reflective voice. "He's got your grip." Naomi looked up. "What?" "His hands," Jackson said, nodding toward Milo. "When he draws, they don't shake. Same as yours did when you used to trace the edges of that old atlas in your room. Remember that?" Naomi smiled faintly. "I used to color the oceans in blue gel pen so they'd shine under the lamp." He chuckled. "Drove your mother crazy. She thought you were ruining maps." "I thought I was making them better," Naomi murmured. They fell into silence again, but this time it was warmer, woven with memory instead of regret. By the time they arrived back at Naomi's modest home on the edge of town, the sky was a canvas of pinks and purples. Jackson parked at the curb, hands still on the wheel. "Come in," Naomi said, not as a courtesy, but an invitation. Jackson hesitated for half a second, then nodded. "All right." Inside, the house was cozy and lived in, with walls covered in Milo's framed art and open sketchbooks stacked on bookshelves like novels. The living room smelled faintly of vanilla and lemon cleaner, and a gentle ceiling fan spun overhead, the rhythm soft and comforting. Milo kicked off his shoes and made a beeline to the kitchen table, flipping open to the next blank page of his sketchbook. Naomi watched him begin a new piece, his face serene. Jackson lingered in the doorway for a moment, then stepped in and took a seat across from Milo. "Can I see what you're working on?" Milo hesitated, then turned the book slightly toward him. It was a scene from earlier that day, but not the worst part. It was the moment Naomi had taken Milo's hand and led him away from the crowd. Her shoulders were straight, chin up. Milo had drawn himself beside her, head held high. Jackson was just behind them, a protective presence, more mountain than man. But what caught Jackson's attention wasn't their faces, it was the way Milo had drawn the shadows. Long, trailing behind them, but never touching them. "It's beautiful," Jackson said softly. Milo didn't speak, but he nodded once. Naomi leaned against the doorframe and watched them. Something about this, about her father sitting with her son, both quiet but fully present, unraveled something old and tight in her chest. Later that night, after Milo had fallen asleep in his room, his sketchbook still open on the bed beside him, Naomi made tea and handed Jackson a mug. They sat on the back porch, the night cool and still, filled with the sound of distant crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves. "He's strong," Jackson said. "He's had to be," Naomi replied. "I should have been around," he said quietly. "When your mother died, everything felt unglued. I didn't know how to hold it together. And when Ramona started pulling strings, making everything about her, I walked. I told myself I was doing the right thing. But I wasn't doing anything at all." Naomi sipped her tea, letting his words settle between them. "You hurt me," she said. "You left me to deal with all of them alone. And I did. But I shouldn't have had to." "I know," he said. "And I can't change that. But I can be here now, if you'll let me." She studied him. The lines on his face were deeper. His hands were more worn. But his eyes, they were the same. The eyes of the man who used to carry her on his shoulders during county fairs, who built her a dollhouse from scrap wood, who taught her to measure twice and cut once. "I'm not asking for perfection," she said. "Just consistency." "You'll have it," he promised. Naomi nodded, and for the first time in years, she believed him. In the days that followed, Jackson kept his word. He came by in the evenings, sometimes with groceries, sometimes just to sit and talk. He helped Milo build a custom shelf for his art supplies. He repaired the leaky faucet in the bathroom. He didn't ask for thanks. And Milo blossomed. He began a new series titled What I Saw. His drawings captured moments that often went unnoticed: a woman at a bus stop staring into the distance, two kids trading lunchbox snacks on a school bench, a man kneeling beside a boy, handing him a sketchbook. Some of the drawings were painful, like the one of Ramona holding up the collar, her mouth twisted in a mocking smile. But Milo never drew himself with his head down. Even in the hard moments, he made himself dull. One afternoon, Naomi found him at the kitchen table again. He had just finished another piece. This one showed the porch from the reunion, but in the foreground were three figures walking away. In the bottom corner, Milo had written in tidy block letters, "The moment I remembered I'm not theirs to break." Naomi sat beside him, eyes misty. "You drew it like it was a beginning," she whispered. Milo shrugged. "I think it was." And in that moment, Naomi understood something she hadn't before, not just about her son, but about herself. You don't need everyone to love you. You don't need applause to be whole. You need truth. You need your people, whoever they are. And you need to be able to walk away when love comes wrapped in cruelty. That night, Naomi framed Milo's drawing and hung it in the hallway. She placed it right where they'd see it every time they walked in or out of the house. A reminder. Not of what happened, but of how they chose to remember it. The hall light buzzed softly above Naomi as she adjusted the frame on the wall one last time. Milo's drawing, the porch, the shadows, the three figures walking away, now hung at eye level beside family photos she'd taken herself. It was surrounded by snapshots of a life that didn't need permission to matter: Milo's science fair smile, his first art show, a picnic with friends who had become like family. Every image glowed with warmth, not from lighting or editing, but from truth. Real, messy, loving truth. Naomi stepped back and took it all in. The drawing grounded her, anchoring everything else like a spine. She exhaled. It had been a month since the reunion, the day she and Milo had walked away, with Jackson quietly beside them. In that short time, the rhythm of their lives had begun to shift, subtly at first. It wasn't that everything had magically healed, but something had opened, unblocked, begun to breathe again. Jackson kept showing up. Not every day. Not in grand, sweeping gestures. But in the ways that mattered. He started swinging by on Friday evenings, sometimes with takeout, sometimes with nothing but his company. He taught Milo how to sandwood properly and helped Naomi build floating shelves for her ever-growing collection of cookbooks. He even came to Milo's weekend art classes, not just as a driver, but as a witness. He listened. Not just to Milo's stories about school or Naomi's daily frustrations with freelancing, but to the quiet, unspoken things, the space between their words. And the way he looked at them? It wasn't with guilt or pity. It was with recognition. Like he saw their little family for what it truly was: resilient, beautiful, and enough. One Sunday afternoon, Naomi hosted a small dinner. Not a reunion, not a performance. Just people who mattered. The backyard was transformed with string lights, fold-out tables, mismatched chairs, and the smell of roasted garlic and rosemary from the oven. Jackson brought wood for the fire pit. Milo hung his artwork on the fence, using clothespins and twine. It wasn't curated or themed. It was honest. Around 4 p.m., guests began to arrive: Miss Bellamy, Milo's art teacher, with a peach cobbler in hand. The Washingtons from next door, who brought their twins and a cooler of homemade lemonade. Naomi's old friend Cam from her college design class came, too, along with his partner and their excitable dachshund, who instantly fell in love with Milo. It wasn't a crowd, but it didn't need to be. As evening settled and fireflies blinked like secret messages, Naomi stood at the edge of her porch, watching Milo explain one of his drawings to Miss Bellamy. It was the one of Jackson handing him the sketchbook. Naomi had seen that drawing many times now, but it still caught her breath. Because that moment had been more than a gift. It had been an undoing of silence. Cam came over with 2 drinks, handing one to Naomi. "Your dad's really here," he said with a gentle smile. Naomi nodded. "He's trying. He's doing," Cam corrected. "You can see it. He's here." She looked over to where Jackson sat by the fire pit, laughing softly at something one of the twins had said. His eyes found hers, and he raised his drink slightly in a silent toast. Naomi smiled back. Later, as dusk deepened into night and guests began to gather their things, Milo pulled her aside. "Mom?" "Yeah, baby?" He glanced down at his sketchbook, which he'd been clutching tightly all evening. "Can I show Grandpa something? Just us?" Naomi nodded and gently touched his back. "Of course." She watched as Milo walked over to Jackson and led him to the porch steps. They sat down together, the yard quieting around them. Milo opened to a page Naomi hadn't seen before. From where she stood, she couldn't make out the image, but she saw Jackson lean in, then go very still. Then, slowly, he reached out and placed a hand over Milo's. The boy didn't flinch, he just looked up, waiting. Jackson said something Naomi couldn't hear, and Milo nodded. Then they just sat there, heads bowed over the sketchbook, like two people finding home in the same memory. When Jackson finally stood up, he walked toward Naomi, his expression unreadable but his pace steady. "He sees things," he said softly. Naomi tilted her head. "What was it?" "A drawing of me," he said. "Not from the reunion. From the day I left." Naomi blinked. "How could he?" Jackson shook his head. "He couldn't." "Not exactly. But he drew it anyway. Me, walking down the driveway. You, at the window. He got the feeling of it. The emptiness. And then on the other page, he drew me walking back. Same driveway. But this time, you and him are on the porch. And I'm not alone." Naomi pressed a hand to her mouth. "He's rewriting it," Jackson said. "Not to erase the pain. But to make sense of it. To make peace with it." Naomi swallowed hard. "He's 10. He's an artist," Jackson corrected. "And maybe a healer." She smiled. "He got that from his grandfather." "No," he said, eyes soft. "He got that from his mother." That night, when everyone had left and the house was quiet again, Naomi found Milo asleep on the couch, his sketchbook resting on his chest. She gently moved it aside, pausing only to glance at the page he'd left open. It was a dinner table, nothing extravagant. Mismatched chairs, uneven candles. But at the center was a loaf of bread and 3 pairs of hands, reaching for one another. No labels. No punchlines. Just connection. Naomi framed that page the next morning. It joined the others on the wall, each piece a testament not just to what they'd been through, but to how they had chosen to rise from it. And from that point on, they stopped referring to the day of the reunion as the collar incident. They called it what it really was. The day we walked toward ourselves. Summer came and went, and with it, the weight of pretending. There were no more Monroe reunions marked on Naomi's calendar. No polite RSVP texts, no anxious shopping for outfits that said I'm trying, but not trying too hard. When the group chat buzzed with messages about the next big family weekend, Naomi muted it. Not with anger. Not even bitterness. Just quiet finality. She had learned that silence could be both a weapon and a shield, but now, it was simply peace. Milo didn't ask about Ramona or the cousins. He didn't ask why they hadn't been invited again. He knew. He had seen what most adults never could, how sometimes the people who share your blood are the ones most willing to drain you of your joy. Instead, Milo drew. He filled his sketchbooks, one after another, with the kind of clarity that only comes from surviving something and walking out the other side with your eyes wide open. His art told the story of a boy who had been told he didn't belong, and chose to belong to himself instead. There were new drawings now, ones Naomi hadn't seen before. Sketches of campfires surrounded by folding chairs. Of a dog with soulful eyes lying at Milo's feet. Of Jackson, hunched over a workbench, building something with his bare hands while Milo sat nearby, sketchbook open, watching like a student studying a master. But the one that hung in Naomi's living room, in the center of everything, was still that porch scene, the drawing of the 3 of them walking away. It had become a kind of compass. A marker in time. A visual reminder of the moment everything changed. By the time autumn rolled in, with crisp leaves skittering across the sidewalk and a breeze that carried promise rather than pressure, a new rhythm had settled into place. Sunday dinners were now a ritual. Nothing formal. No assigned seating. No head of the table declaring which child deserved the biggest scoop of mashed potatoes. Just people who showed up. Every week, Jackson brought something from the farmer's market, fresh squash, golden beets, once even a bag of Honeycrisp apples that Naomi turned into a pie. Sometimes Milo invited his art teacher or classmate whose home life was turbulent. Naomi's best friend Cam brought his partner, and once, even his mom, who knitted Milo a scarf in his favorite color without asking. And always, after dinner, came story time. Not bedtime stories. Not fables. Just real ones. They took turns telling stories about their childhoods, their struggles, the lessons that stuck. Sometimes funny. Sometimes painful. Always honest. One night, as the group sat under a string of lights in the backyard, Sipping cider and listening to Jackson explain how he once got lost in a hardware store as a kid, Milo interrupted with a quiet but firm voice. "Can I tell one too?" Everyone nodded. Naomi held her breath. Milo opened his newest sketchbook, flipping through until he reached a 2-page spread. One side showed the Monroe reunion, Ramona's face pinched in that familiar smirk, the collar dangling like a trophy. The other side was that same patio, empty now, the chairs turned over, the laughter gone. "I used to think I had to be smaller to fit there," he said. "Like if I stayed quiet, I could maybe earn a spot. But I don't want to be small anymore. I like how it feels out here." Naomi felt the tears come fast. Not the hot ones from anger, but the cool, clear ones that came from witnessing something sacred. After the guests left that night, and the dishes were drying on the rack, Naomi found herself sitting on the porch swing with Jackson. He passed her a mug of cocoa. "You've built something beautiful here. It's not just me," she said. "No," he agreed. "But it started with you." She looked out over the backyard, now empty but humming with the memory of laughter. "You know," she said, "I spent a long time thinking I had to make excuses for people. That if I just explained it better, softened the edges, they'd love us the way we needed." Jackson sighed. "We teach ourselves to survive. Sometimes by making ourselves invisible." "I'm done with that," she said. He nodded. So is he. A few days later, Naomi and Milo visited the courthouse. They weren't there for anything dramatic, no big speech, no bitter legal battle. Just a form, an appointment, and a name. Milo's name. "Are you sure?" Naomi asked as they stood outside the glass doors, the crisp wind tugging at her coat. He nodded. "I want to carry what matters." Inside, the clerk was kind and efficient. The paperwork was filed, the signatures inked, and just like that, Milo Monroe became Milo Jackson. Not to spite anyone. Not to erase the past. But to honor who had shown up. Later that night, Naomi wrote a note and tucked it into Milo's new sketchbook. "Your name is yours now. Completely. Every letter, every line. You chose it. You earned nothing, you were already enough. But you claimed it. And that's power. That's legacy." Milo didn't say anything when he found the note. But he taped it to the inside cover of the sketchbook, just beneath his signature, written carefully, proudly, in block letters. Milo Jackson. When winter arrived, with its long nights and quiet mornings, Naomi found herself reflecting more and more on what family meant. It wasn't a table full of people clinking glasses and biting their tongues. It wasn't gift bags ranked like a contest or conversations laced with insult disguised as tradition. It was this. A boy curled under a blanket, sketching by firelight. A man who learned too late but still showed up early. A mother who finally said no, and meant it. A community of people who didn't share her blood but shared everything else. And so, every year when the Monroe texts rolled in with save-the-date flyers and talk of barbecue and cousin time, Naomi smiled, then deleted them. Because she had her own tradition now? Every summer, they hosted the gathering, no last names required. Just real people. Real love. Real laughter. And at every gathering, on the mantel above the fireplace, hung that same framed drawing. 3 figures. Walking away. Together.